To understand the inequalities of today and how to reduce them for future generations, we must first understand how they came to be in the first place. Most people can agree that inequality has been one of history's most prominent problems that continues today throughout the world. Through reading 5 different valuable sources, I was able to understand the roots of inequality a little bit better. Today, I'm going to be discussing the history of gender inequality, economic inequality, and racial inequality, as well as the causes of these forms of inequality and how our future generations can reduce them for a better future. So we're going to start with gender inequality. And through reading Angela Saini's 2023 book, The Patriarchs, The Origins of Inequality, I was able to learn a little bit more about the roots of gender inequality, a form of inequality that really is not talked about nearly enough. Some historians believe that our world has always been male-dominated because of the biological differences between a man and a woman. There is, however, no actual evidence to back this claim up at all. We can even see this assumption of history showcased in popular media, such as the earlier movies in the Planet of the Apes franchise that paint society as a patriarch in nature. The problem with this assumption is the existence of matrilineal societies throughout history. Saini describes matrilineal societies on page 20 as a society in which a child is seen to belong to her mother, she in turn belongs to her mother, and so on, all the way back to the root ancestress. Such societies throughout history include the Kasi peoples, the Minangkabau peoples, I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong, and the Tuareg peoples. However, some of the matrilineal societies have been forced into patriarchs over time due to an overwhelming outside force. Marija Gimbutas was a 20th century historian who challenged the common assumption of male dominance in the early world. Gimbutas' theory stated that early Europe was a goddess worshiping society that was forced into a patriarch by oncoming forces of what she calls the Kurgans. Saini states on page 65 that the Kurgans allegedly brought their patriarchal cultures, assimilating or destroying the societies that they met along the way. While there are many problems with this theory, Gimbutas challenged the common assumption of male dominance successfully. On page 121 of this book, Saini writes of the Greek myth of Clytemnestra. In Greek legend, the wife of King Agamemnon, I cannot pronounce anything, I guess. Clytemnestra takes a lover and then kills her husband, only to find herself stabbed to death by her son in revenge. The existence of this story suggests it could have been used as propaganda to justify the existence of a patriarchal society. This is just some things that I gathered from this book, and to learn more about the history of gender inequality, I would highly suggest reading The Patriarchs, The Origins of Inequality by Angela Saini. It was a very intriguing and thought-provoking read that provided me with a lot of information on this subject. Okay, so the next form of inequality that we're going to talk about is economic inequality. Economic inequality doesn't have an exact origin, as social hierarchies are one of the oldest concepts in human history. It is important to note, however, that some governments have definitely made this issue much worse than it needed to be throughout history, leading to revolts and wars. The Flemish Revolt of 1379 to 1385 is a unique case as it seemingly had more political reasoning than economic reasonings. It is thought that the Black Death that preceded this revolt was helpful for the economy, and thus this revolt was mainly to overthrow the Count of Flanders. However, there is a case to be made that economic inequality may have played a part in this revolt. In a 2021 article written by Jan Dumoulin titled, "Did Inequality Produce Medieval Revolt?" it is explained that blacksmiths were a part of the revolt in Bruges. This is significant as it was stated on page 11 in this article that in 1394 to 1395, the majority of metalworking artisans identified in tax lists belonged to the lowest fiscal class. Now, this was taken about a decade after this revolt, but it does suggest that some people who joined this revolt may have joined because of economic inequality. This revolt highlights the importance of alliances when dealing with problems such as this. On the other side of the coin, the German Peasants' War in the early 16th century was seemingly motivated by economic inequality. The German Catholic Church at the time abused their power with oppressive ruling and the taxing of the German people. Through reading Eric Voilierd's 2020 novel, The War of the Poor, I was able to understand the frustrations of the low-class people in Germany at this time. I would highly suggest this book as it is short, but it's very cinematic in the telling of the story of Thomas Müntzer, a German preacher who would pull citations straight from the Bible to condemn the ways of the church and fuel the fire for an uprising in Germany. For example, Voilierd writes on page 43 that he cited Matthew and John. Every tree that does not bring forth good fruit should be uprooted and cast into the fire. He cited Luke, bring hither mine enemies and slay them before me. He cited the Psalms, the Lord will smash down the old pots of clay with his rod of iron. This war would end in 1525, however, with Müntzer being hung and his followers being defeated. And the last type of inequality that we're going to talk about is racial inequality. Racial inequality can be tied to the transatlantic slave trade from the 16th century. The concept of race was used against African people to justify mass amounts of slavery, and as a result, even in places that slavery is now illegal, racism still remains a prominent problem today. In a 2023 article written by Larissa Brewer Garcia titled Hell to Hell, the conditions of these slave ships in the early modern Atlantic slave trade are described in a disturbingly similar way to the descriptions of hell and purgatory in the Christian faith. Jesuits would use this comparison to scare oncoming slaves into being obedient to them. It states in this article that a missionary that was on board one of these ships by the name of Lorenzo de Luca described these ships as follows: I must call this ship the image of hell, or that of purgatory. I know I cannot say that it was the image of hell because these sufferings were temporary and entailed the hope of their end. The name of hell does not fit. I will call it therefore purgatory, and I assure you such a name can apply very well to it because those who would have endured it would have gained a way to expiate their sins and found it of great merit to their soul. The descriptions of hell and purgatory were therefore used as manipulation to play off of these African people's trauma. To dive deeper into the roots of racial inequality, I read the 1944 novel Capitalism and Slavery, written by politician and writer Eric Williams. Although there may be more up-to-date sources on this topic, Williams was a pioneer of sorts. He popularized the theory that the origins of slavery had little to do with the concept of race, and rather the vast economic potential of it. Williams writes on page 65, the production of these valuable goods stimulated capitalism, provided employment for British labor, and brought these great profits to England. So now we have the causes of inequality. And it's important to note that there isn't exactly one sole reason for how inequalities came to be, but we can, however, deduce some of the reasonings. One of the reasons for gender inequality was presumably because of the rise and popularity of patriarchal societies and the indoctrination of societies that may have thought differently. As a result, the idea of male dominance was just probably pushed over time. The idea of economic inequality is unique because it is sort of a given in the concept of social hierarchies, but it can also be noted that some people in power have definitely made this issue worse over time. And then racial inequality stems from the practice of slavery and how that stimulated capitalism. So how can our future generations reduce inequality? I believe our future generations should have proper education on all types of inequalities, not just the ones I list here today, so these issues don't carry on into the future. Especially as someone who is an English education major, the concept of book bannings, especially those that detail the history of inequalities, seem very backwards. Because of this, I believe those of us who want to help build a better future should make our voices heard against these inequalities that continue to plague our world and are at extremes throughout different countries. To learn about how you can get more involved to reduce inequalities, you can read about the SDG goal of reducing inequalities within and among countries. I'll put the link in the description below for this video for those of you who are interested in reading more. Thank you for watching.